The Alpha found his Maid freezing in the snow during the winter feast. His fury shook the pack when the wind howled through the forest like a restless spirit, shaking the boughs of the towering pines. Snow fell thickly, covering the land in a pristine, glittering blanket. It was the night of the winter feast, the one night when the pack celebrated strength, loyalty, and unity. Fires blazed in the castle halls, their light flickering across banners of deep crimson and silver, and the scent of roasted meats, spiced wine, and pine filled the air. At the center of it all stood KL, the Alpha. His presence alone commanded the attention of every pack member, from the lowest servant to the oldest warrior. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and powerful, with eyes that could burn through lies and fear alike. Tonight, as he moved through the hall, a quiet storm seemed to follow him, a mixture of authority and suppressed rage that kept even the bravest in awe. No one noticed Alara, the maid. She moved silently among the guests, carrying trays of food and pouring wine, her pale hands trembling slightly from the cold that had seeped into the castle through the open doors and snow-covered hallways. Her hair, dark as a raven's wing, hung in damp strands around her face, and her blue eyes reflected more than the candlelight. They carried the weight of loneliness, of a life shadowed by loss and fear. She was unnoticed, as always. The pack's attention was on the Alpha, on the festivities, on the politics and power plays of the night. Alara had long ago learned to stay small, to move quietly, to bend like a shadow and vanish when anyone tried to look too closely. Yet tonight fate had other plans. A sharp, piercing scream cut through the music and laughter, shattering the illusion of warmth and joy. It came from outside, where the snow swirled like a living thing. Kale froze mid-step, his senses flaring. Every Alpha is trained to protect their pack, and something in that scream told him that someone was in danger. Someone close, someone he had overlooked. Without a word, he strode toward the main doors, his cloak of deep midnight blue billowing behind him. The wind tore at his cape and chilled his skin, but he barely noticed. His eyes narrowed as he scanned the snow-blanketed courtyard. And then he saw her, Alara. She was on her knees, her body trembling violently, her breath forming small clouds in the frozen air. Snow clung to her hair and clothing, coating her like frost on a delicate flower. Her hands were pressed to the ground, as though she could hold herself to life with sheer force of will. But the frost and cold were winning. Kale's fury ignited, a fire that surged from his chest to his fingertips. Rage at the thought that someone could endanger his maid, someone under his protection, flared within him. He did not pause, did not hesitate. With long, powerful strides, he reached her and scooped her up into his arms, lifting her like she weighed nothing. The world narrowed to the sensation of her cold body against his warmth, her fragile pulse against his own relentless heartbeat. "Alara," he growled, his voice low and commanding. "What were you thinking?" She tried to speak, but the cold stole her words. Only a soft, almost inaudible whisper escaped her lips. I didn't mean to." Kale's jaw tightened. His eyes swept the courtyard, daring the winter itself to defy him. "You could have died," he said, every word sharp as ice. "Do you understand?" Alara's gaze met his, and for the first time she saw not only his fury, but something deeper, an undercurrent of concern, of fear even, masked by anger. It made her heart beat faster, a strange mix of dread and longing that she could not name. He carried her through the grand doors and into the warmth of the hall. Servants and guests parted instinctively, sensing the storm in his presence. Kale did not set her down immediately. He strode to a private chamber, the weight of his anger and the tenderness he did not fully understand pressing against him. Once inside, he placed her gently on a fur-covered bench near the hearth. Firelight danced across her pale face, illuminating the delicate curve of her cheek, the tremble in her lips, the wide, frightened eyes that met his. Kale knelt beside her, his hand brushing snow from her sleeve, and the heat of the fire seemed to mingle with the heat rising from his chest. "You are mine to protect," he said softly, almost to himself. "Do you understand? Mine." Alara swallowed hard, her lips parting slightly. She felt the weight of his words like a tether, a chain that both frightened and comforted her. She had never been claimed before. Not truly, not by anyone who mattered. And yet, in the shadow of his gaze, she felt a strange sense of belonging, of safety, even as fear coursed through her veins. I, she began, but the words died in her throat. She could not explain the frost that had been creeping through her veins, the shadow that seemed to follow her, the whisper of a curse she had always hidden. It was a secret too dangerous to speak aloud, and Cale's presence only made it feel more urgent, more real. Cale's eyes softened briefly as he observed her struggle, then hardened again. "Rest," he commanded, his voice steady and unwavering. "Do not move until I say so." Elara nodded, shivering, and closed her eyes. The fire crackled and the snowstorm outside raged on. But within the walls of that chamber, a fragile bubble of warmth and silence formed around them. Yet even in that quiet, the world outside pressed against the door. Whispers of danger, shadows of envy, the restless stirrings of the pack that waited for the Alpha's command. Hours passed, though it felt like minutes. Cale remained by her side, standing vigil. His anger had not abated, but it had transformed into something quieter, sharper, an intense focus that burned for her safety. He could not rest, could not eat, could not turn his thoughts elsewhere. Every instinct of the Alpha screamed at him to protect, to guard, to ensure that nothing, no curse, no rival, no winter, could harm her again. And yet beneath his fury a new emotion stirred. Curiosity, fascination, and a reluctant admiration. Elara was small, fragile, and yet there was a fire in her that defied the cold, a quiet strength that refused to bend entirely. It intrigued him, unsettled him, and drew him closer, like a moth to a flame he had learned long ago to fear. Finally, as the storm outside began to wane and the first light of dawn painted the snowy horizon in pale gold, Elara spoke. Her voice was barely a whisper, but it carried a weight that made Cale pause. "The frost, it is not the worst danger," she said, shivering. "The curse, it follows me here." Cale froze. The words were strange, foreign, and yet they made sense in a way that chilled him deeper than the snow ever could. His jaw clenched, his hands tightening into fists at his sides. He had faced enemies, betrayed allies, and survived battles where death had brushed against him like a shadow. But a curse? Something unseen, creeping, following the one person he now felt responsible for protecting? That was a threat he could not tolerate. "What do you mean?" he demanded, though his voice was lower now, more controlled, tempered with a new intensity. Elara lifted her eyes, meeting his gaze fully for the first time, unafraid or perhaps unable to hide her fear any longer. It has haunted my family," she whispered. "I thought I had escaped it, but the snow, the night, it awakened it again. I cannot explain more. Not yet. Only be careful. It will not wait." Cale's mind raced. He had dealt with threats of every kind. Rival alphas, wild beasts, treacherous members of his own pack. But this was different. Invisible, unseen, insidious. And yet he knew one thing clearly. He would not allow anything to touch her. Not while he still drew breath. A silence fell between them, heavy with unspoken questions and unformed emotions. Elara's pulse slowed under the warmth of the fire and the presence of the Alpha, though her hand still trembled. Cale, meanwhile, paced the room, his mind turning over possibilities and threats, every instinct honed to sharpness. Finally he stopped and looked at her, his eyes dark and steady. "Tell me everything," he said, voice like iron. "No matter how dangerous, no matter how dark."
"I will hear it, and then we will decide how to fight it."
Together, Elara nodded slowly, the first spark of trust flickering within her. She did not fully understand this Alpha, the rage, the power, the strange mixture of warmth and fear he invoked, but she sensed something vital. He would not abandon her, not now, not ever. And in that moment, as dawn broke across the snow-covered landscape, both of them understood something unspoken yet undeniable. Their fates were intertwined. bound together by a night of frost, fury, and fragile hope. But even as the sun rose, the shadow lingered at the edges of the castle, whispering secrets and threats that neither could yet face. The curse had awakened, and the winter feast, meant to celebrate life and power, had become the beginning of a journey that would test their hearts, their loyalty, and their very souls. Cale clenched his fists, his jaw tight. Outside, the snow glistened, silent and beautiful, but he knew the storm had only just begun. And somewhere deep in the shadows the curse watched, waiting for the next move. The castle seemed alive that morning, though not with laughter or warmth. Shadows clung to the corners, stretching unnaturally as the weak winter sunlight fell across the halls. Cale walked through the corridors, his boots echoing on the cold stone floors, his mind never leaving Alara. She had remained in his private chambers, wrapped in furs, but even there the frost that clung to her form from the night before had not entirely left. He had ordered the servants to stay out, giving her space, yet he remained outside the door, pacing, listening. He did not trust the castle walls, the halls, or even the bright sunlight. Something had touched her last night, something he could not see, but he could feel it, like a chill brushing along his spine. Alara, meanwhile, sat on the fur-covered bench by the fire. Her hands were still trembling, and her blue eyes were wide, fixed on the flames. She knew Cale was outside watching, and she did not resent it. Strange as it was, she felt safer knowing the Alpha was near. He was a storm, powerful, dangerous, and unpredictable, but he was hers to protect, and for some reason, that thought warmed her more than the fire. "I will not allow it to touch you," Cale's voice suddenly said from the doorway. It was low, rough, and yet steady, carrying the weight of promise. Alara looked up at him. I cannot stop it," she whispered. "The curse. It follows me. I do not understand it fully, but it is patient, and it waits for moments like the night before. The frost, the snow, it awakens it." Cale's jaw clenched, his mind raced, thinking of enemies, shadows, and invisible threats. "Then we will face it together," he said simply, yet with absolute conviction. "You are not alone." She hesitated, then nodded, a small gesture that betrayed both her fear and a budding trust. Something inside her shifted, the first spark of hope in many years. The day passed slowly. Cale kept to her side, his presence constant, his gaze always watching. Servants moved quietly around them, whispering among themselves, aware of the unusual closeness between the Alpha and the Maid. Some looked on with curiosity, others with envy. But Cale did not care, not now, not ever. Yet even in the castle's warmth, the curse was stirring. Shadows flickered along the hallways where no one walked. Cold spots appeared unexpectedly, chilling the stone floor even near blazing fires. Alara felt it in small ways, her breath catching, her hair moving though no wind blew, the faintest whisper of voices at the edges of her hearing. "I hear it," she admitted softly, during a rare moment of quiet. "It whispers my name, calls to me, tries to pull me into the cold. I cannot fight it alone." Cale knelt beside her again, resting a massive hand on hers. "Then you will not fight alone. I will guard you, every moment, every breath. Do you understand?" Her hand trembled slightly under his grip, and she nodded. "I understand."
As the evening approached, the winter feast resumed in the castle's grand hall.
Guests arrived in their finest attire, their eyes flicking occasionally to Cale and Alara. Some whispered rumors, questioning why the Alpha had taken the Maid under his protection. Others speculated silently, noting the strange tension that seemed to hang around them like a veil of snow. Cale did not speak to them. He had no patience for whispers or politics tonight. His attention was fixed entirely on Alara, who moved carefully through the hall, carrying trays of food and wine under his silent, watchful gaze. But then, as the first guest sat down and the music began, the curse showed its first sign in the hall. A shadow flickered across the wall near Alara. At first it seemed like a trick of the candlelight, a moving reflection. But then it twisted, taking a shape that was darker than any shadow could be, forming the outline of a figure she did not recognize. It reached toward her, thin tendrils stretching across the floor as though searching. Elara froze. Her heart thudded violently, and she could barely breathe. She felt the pull of the darkness like a hand at her chest pressing her down, demanding she come. Cale saw it instantly. His eyes narrowed, and in a single motion, he moved to stand between her and the shadow. The guests noticed the change in the alpha, the sudden tension that snapped through the hall. A hush fell over the crowd as Cale's presence seemed to push back against the unnatural darkness. "Stay close to me," he commanded, his voice low and full of authority that no one could question. "Do not move." Elara obeyed, her small hand finding his massive one, gripping it tightly. The shadow hesitated at the edge of his influence, then recoiled slowly, as if it had underestimated his strength. Yet the warning was clear. The curse was alive, aware, and growing stronger. It was not merely a memory of frost or a family tale. It was a force that hungered for her fear, for her weakness. After the guests had settled and the music resumed, Cale guided Elara to a side room, away from the hall's warmth and scrutiny. She sank into a chair, exhausted, and he crouched beside her again. "You cannot face this alone," he said quietly, almost a whisper now. "You must trust me. Can you?" She looked up at him, her blue eyes wide and vulnerable, yet filled with something new, determination. I will try," she said softly. "But I am afraid. I do not know what it wants or why it follows me." Cale's gaze softened. "Fear is natural," he said. "But you will not face it without support. I will not allow it." Hours passed in that quiet chamber. The fire dwindled to embers, yet Cale stayed by her side. Each time the shadow stirred, each time the wind whispered through the cracks of the castle walls, he was there. And each time he saw Elara grow, not just in courage, but in a quiet, resilient power that he had never anticipated. By the middle of the night, the castle was silent, except for their breathing and the occasional crackle of the fire. The storm outside had slowed, the snow falling like soft feathers. Yet the tension inside remained, thick and unyielding. "Elara," Cale said finally, breaking the silence, "there is something I need you to understand. Whatever this curse is, it feeds on fear. It seeks weakness, but it cannot touch what is strong. And you are stronger than you know." She shook her head, unable to fully believe him. "I am weak," she whispered. "I am only a maid, a servant, nothing more." Cale's eyes blazed, sharp and unwavering. "You are not nothing. You have endured more than anyone should. You have survived when the frost and shadow would have taken others. That is strength, Elara. Not the strength of muscle or claw, but the strength of heart. And that strength is more dangerous to the curse than anything else in the world." For the first time, Elara felt a spark of hope ignite within her chest. Cale's words, though fierce, were filled with truth. She did not need to be perfect or powerful in the ways the Alpha expected of warriors. She needed only to face the darkness with courage, and perhaps with trust in someone who would not abandon her. As the first hints of dawn painted the sky pale gold and pink, a new sound came. A whisper, soft and almost melodic, drifting from the hallways. It was the curse again, closer now, testing its reach. Elara shivered, and Cale moved instinctively, placing a protective arm around her. "You will not face it alone," he repeated, as though chanting the truth against the invisible threat. Elara leaned slightly against him, drawing strength from his presence. "Die?" She did not fully understand him, or why he had chosen to protect her, or why he evoked both fear and longing in her heart. But for the first time she believed she might survive this, if only because he would not allow her to fall. Yet the warning remained. Shadows were growing, whispers were intensifying, and the frost that had once seemed distant now pressed close to the castle's very walls. The winter feast, meant to celebrate life and unity, had become a stage for unseen forces. forces that did not obey fire, walls, or even alphas. Kale's eyes darkened as he watched the first pale light of dawn shimmer across the snow outside. His grip on Alara's hand tightened, not in anger, but in promise. "We will face this," he said quietly, "and we will win. Whatever it takes, I will not lose you to the frost or to the shadows." Alara nodded, resting her head lightly against his shoulder. For a fleeting moment, the fear inside her quieted. She felt something she had not felt in years. Safety, warmth, and perhaps even the beginnings of trust. But deep in the corners of the castle, where the firelight could not reach, the shadows shifted. The curse was patient. It had learned its prey, and it would not stop until it had tested the limits of her courage and the Alpha's resolve. And so, as the snow fell silently outside and the first notes of morning wind brushed against the castle walls, a fragile bond was formed, one of protection, fear, and a strange unspoken longing, a bond that would be tested in ways neither Kale nor Alara could yet imagine. The winter feast had begun, but the true struggle, for trust, for survival, for the heart, was only just awakening. The castle had grown quiet after the winter feast, but the calm was deceptive. In the grand hall, where the echoes of music and laughter still lingered like distant ghosts, Kale paced, restless and alert. The shadows of the previous night seemed to cling to the walls, curling in corners and stretching across the floor, as though the castle itself remembered the frost that had threatened Alara. Kale's mind raced with thoughts of her safety, and the curse that pursued her like a predator in the dark. Every instinct of the Alpha demanded that he guard her, protect her, and anticipate danger before it could arrive. But the problem was larger than mere guards or walls. This threat was unseen, intangible, and patient. It could strike anywhere, at any time, and it would not be deterred by force alone. Alara remained in his private chambers for most of the day, resting near the fire and recovering from the chill that had penetrated her bones. She was silent, thoughtful, her mind restless with questions she could not yet answer. The curse had been quiet for hours, but its presence was felt in small ways. The air that seemed to grow colder for no reason, the faint whispers at the edges of hearing, and the flickering of shadows that moved even in the brightest rooms. "I will not allow it to take you," Kale said again, kneeling beside her as he often did. His hand rested on hers, warm and reassuring, grounding her against the uncertainty that gnawed at her mind. "Do you understand me, Alara? I will not allow it." She looked up at him, her blue eyes meeting his dark ones. There was gratitude there, yes, but also fear, and something else, a spark of something she did not yet recognize in herself. I
want to believe you,"
she whispered.
"but I do not know if I can."
Kale's jaw tightened, but he did not release her hand. "Then you will learn," he said simply. "You are stronger than you think. And I will remind you of it every time the shadow comes for you." That night, the first signs of political unrest began to appear. The winter feast had not only celebrated the pack's strength, but also stirred envy and ambition among its members. Some of Kale's lieutenants had begun to whisper to one another, questioning why he had allowed a mere maid to occupy so much of his attention. Others wondered whether his judgment had been clouded by emotions he had no right to indulge. Kale sensed it all. His alpha instincts, honed over years of leadership, detected the subtle shifts in loyalty and whispers of dissent. But he did not answer their murmurs or confront their doubts directly. His attention remained fixed on Alara, and on the unseen threat that lingered at the edges of the castle. "You must be careful," he said to her that evening, as she helped him clear his private study. "There are those who will see your presence as a weakness. You must learn to move with purpose, not fear. Do you understand?" Alara nodded, though her hands shook slightly.
I understand," she said.
But deep inside, a quiet voice whispered doubts. She was not a warrior, not a leader. She was a maid, small and fragile. How could she face what was coming? Kale saw her hesitation and frowned, his eyes narrowing. "Strength is not measured by size or rank," he said, his voice firm but calm. "It is measured by courage, by determination, and by the willingness to face the darkness even when it seems impossible. You have all of that, Alara. Do not forget it. Later that night, the curse made its presence known once more. It began subtly, a cold draft that swept through the hallways, extinguishing candles and causing the flames in the fireplaces to shiver and twist unnaturally. Then the shadows deepened, stretching across walls and floors, forming shapes that were almost human, almost alive. Alara felt it first. Her breath caught, and her heart raced as the darkness seemed to reach for her, curling around her like a living thing. She froze, unable to move, unable to speak. Cale was immediately at her side, his hand gripping hers tightly. "Do not move," he commanded. His eyes scanned the room, narrowing as he assessed the threat. The shadows recoiled slightly at his presence, but the darkness did not retreat entirely. It lingered, waiting, patient and relentless. "You must face it," Cale said quietly, his voice steady and unwavering. "Do not let fear control you. Stand with me." Alara took a deep breath, summoning every ounce of courage she could muster. She felt the warmth of Cale's hand and the strength of his presence, and for the first time she believed that she might be able to face the darkness. Slowly, she lifted her chin and met the shadow's gaze, her voice barely above a whisper. "I will not run. I will not be afraid." The shadow hesitated as if surprised by her resolve. Cale tightened his grip on her hand, his eyes never leaving the darkness. Together they held their ground, a silent declaration of defiance that the curse had not expected. For a moment the room was still. The shadow seemed to flicker and twist, then slowly recede, dissolving into the corners and walls as if their will had been broken. Alara exhaled shakily, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and triumph. "You did well," Cale said quietly, his hand still holding hers. "You are stronger than you know." Alara looked up at him, a faint smile touching her lips. I could not have done it without you," she admitted. Cale's expression softened, but there was still a storm in his eyes. "You did it because you faced the darkness, not because I was here. Remember that. Your strength comes from within." The next days brought new challenges. The whispers among the pack grew louder, and Cale's attention to Alara became a topic of gossip and speculation. Some saw it as favoritism, others as a potential weakness in his leadership. But Cale remained unshaken, his focus unwavering. Alara, meanwhile, began to train herself in small ways. Under Cale's guidance, she learned to move with purpose, to recognize the signs of the curse's approach, and to resist its pull. She discovered a strength within herself that she had never known existed, a quiet power that grew with every moment of fear faced and every small victory won. One evening, as snow fell softly outside, Alara approached Cale with a question that had been weighing on her mind. "Why do you care so much?" she asked quietly, her eyes searching his. "I am just a maid. Why risk so much for me?" Cale looked at her, his expression unreadable. For a long moment he said nothing, as if weighing his words carefully. Then he spoke, his voice low and sincere. "Because you matter. Not because of your rank or your role, but because you are alive, and because you are strong in ways that others do not see. You deserve protection. You deserve to survive." Alara felt the warmth spread through her chest, a mix of gratitude and something more complicated, something she could not name. She nodded silently, understanding without words the bond that was forming between them. A bond of trust, loyalty, and perhaps something deeper. But the shadows were never far behind. One night as they walked through the quiet corridors, a whisper floated on the air, soft and melodic, calling Alara's name. She froze, her pulse quickening, and Cale immediately moved to shield her, his eyes scanning the darkness. "It is testing us," he said quietly, his voice tense. "It wants to see how far it can push you, and how far I will go to protect you." Alara took a deep breath, drawing strength from his presence. "Then we will not fail," she said, her voice steady despite the fear that gripped her heart. The curse, relentless and patient, retreated for the moment, but its intent was clear. It would not rest until it had tested every ounce of courage within her, and every ounce of strength within the alpha who had claimed her protection. The political tension within the pack also reached a breaking point. Some members began to plot seeing Kale's attention to Alara as a distraction that could weaken their alpha's authority. Rumors spread of a rival who sought to exploit the curse to challenge Kale's leadership, to claim power while the alpha's focus was divided. Kale sensed the unrest and knew he had to act. He could not allow the pack to falter, nor could he abandon Alara to the whispers and schemes of those who sought to use her against him. The balance between leadership and protection, between authority and love, was delicate, and every decision carried weighty consequences. That night, as the snow fell silently outside the castle walls, Kale and Alara stood together on the balcony, overlooking the frozen forest. The moon cast a silver glow across the land, and the wind whispered through the pines like a ghostly chorus. "We will face this," Kale said, his voice firm, steady. "Together, no matter what comes, we will not be broken." Alara nodded, feeling a new strength within her. "Together," she repeated, her voice filled with determination. But in the depths of the forest, where the moonlight did not reach, the shadows stirred once more. The curse had learned, adapted, and was preparing for its next move. And when it struck again, Kale and Alara would face a challenge that would test not only their courage and strength, but the bond that had begun to form between them. A bond that neither frost nor shadow could break, yet one that could be shattered by the forces rising against them. And so, as the winter night stretched on, the Alpha and the Maid stood together, their hearts bound by trust, fear, and something more profound, while the world around them waited, holding its breath for the storm that was yet to come. The wind howled across the frozen forest, carrying with it the scent of snow, pine, and danger. The castle, once a place of warmth and light, seemed subdued under the weight of an unseen threat. Shadows clung to walls, stretching and twisting as if alive, whispering secrets only Alara could hear. She stood at the edge of the balcony, staring into the night, her breath forming small clouds in the cold air. Kale stepped beside her, his cloak flaring with the wind. His hand brushed against hers, a silent promise, a tether of strength against the darkness that pressed closer with every heartbeat. "It will come," he said quietly, his eyes scanning the forest. "But we are ready, together." Alara swallowed hard, the fear in her chest coiling like a serpent. I hope so," she whispered. "I do not know what I am capable of." Kale turned to her, his gaze intense, unwavering. "You are stronger than you realize, and you will not face this alone." The castle had grown silent. The pack was asleep, unaware of the threat that loomed outside, waiting for the right moment to strike. Kale had ordered the guards to stay vigilant, but even their watchful eyes could not see what was hidden in shadow and frost. Suddenly, a low hum filled the air, barely audible at first. Alara felt it through her bones, a vibration of ancient power, a call from the curse that had followed her since childhood. The frost on the balcony thickened, curling around her feet like fingers. Shadows rose from the forest, black and twisting, forming shapes that were almost human, almost alive. Kale's hand found hers instantly, gripping tightly. "Do not let fear control you," he said. His voice was firm, commanding, a shield against the rising darkness. "Stand with me." Alara took a deep breath, feeling the warmth of his hand and the steadiness of his presence. I will," she said, her voice trembling but resolute. The shadows surged forward, pressing against the balcony doors, reaching for her. The air grew icy, and the whispers intensified, calling her name, testing her resolve. She felt the pull, the weight of the curse pressing against her mind, threatening to overwhelm her senses. Kale stepped in front of her, spreading his arms as if to protect her with his very body. "No," he said, his voice sharp and powerful. "You are mine to protect, and I will not let this touch you." The darkness recoiled at his declaration, but it did not retreat completely. The curse was clever and patient, testing their bond, seeking weakness in their hearts. Alara closed her eyes. drawing strength from his words and his presence. She remembered his promise. They were in this together. And for the first time she felt the warmth of courage stir in her chest, spreading like sunlight through frozen ground. "I am not afraid," she whispered, opening her eyes. "I will face this. I will not let it control me." The shadow hesitated, as though surprised by her resolve. Cale nodded at her, pride and relief shining in his eyes. "Good," he said softly. Now, together, they stepped forward side by side, hands clasped, hearts beating in rhythm. The shadows surged again, twisting and writhing, their shapes forming monstrous faces and clawed hands that reached for them. The wind howled like a chorus of ghosts, carrying the voices of the cursed past that had haunted Elara's family. Elara focused on Cale, on the strength in his stance, the unwavering determination in his gaze. She felt a warmth spread through her, a power that came not from magic alone but from courage, from trust, from the bond they shared. Slowly, the shadows began to falter, their forms wavering as if confused by her presence. Cale pressed forward, his voice cutting through the night. "This ends now. I will not let it harm her." Elara raised her free hand, feeling the frost at her fingertips, and breathed steadily. "It has no power over me," she said. "It cannot touch me, not while I stand with him." The darkness recoiled, shrieking in a soundless howl, then dissolved into mist, retreating back into the forest. The frost melted, the cold receding as warmth spread across the balcony. The first rays of dawn broke over the horizon, painting the snow in gold and silver. Elara sank to her knees, exhausted but alive. Cale lifted her effortlessly into his arms, holding her close. "You did it," he whispered, his lips brushing her hair. "You were brave. You were strong. And you have survived." She leaned against him, her heart still racing, and for the first time she allowed herself to feel relief, hope, and trust. We did it together," she said softly. Cale's eyes softened, yet there was still a shadow of worry in them. "Yes, together. But remember, this is only the beginning. There are forces in the world that do not forgive weakness, that test those who are unprepared. We must remain vigilant." Elara nodded, determination settling into her bones. She had faced fear, darkness, and the curse that had haunted her family for generations. She had survived, and she had discovered her own strength in the process. The days that followed were not easy. The castle's halls remained tense, whispers and gossip swirling among the pack. Some questioned Cale's judgment, while others admired the bond he had formed with Elara. Yet the Alpha did not waver, and Elara grew stronger each day, training herself to recognize the signs of danger, to move with confidence, and to stand firm in the face of the unknown. One evening, Cale and Elara stood together in the training yard, watching the snow fall softly around them. The air was crisp, and the world seemed still for a moment, as if holding its breath. "You have grown stronger," Cale said quietly, his voice carrying both pride and admiration. "I knew you had it in you, but you have surpassed even my expectations." Elara smiled faintly, brushing snow from her hair. "I could not have done it without you," she said. "Your guidance, your protection, it gave me courage." Cale shook his head gently. "Now, the courage was always yours. I only reminded you of it. You faced the darkness, and you did not falter. That is what makes you strong." They stood in silence for a moment, the snow falling around them like a blessing, the world outside the castle seeming distant and fragile. And in that quiet, unspoken words passed between them, trust, respect, and the beginnings of a bond that neither frost nor shadow could break. But the world outside was not yet free of danger. The rival Alpha, who had sought to exploit the curse, had not given up. From the shadows of the forest he watched the castle, waiting for the moment to strike, to test Cale's strength, and perhaps take advantage of Elara's newfound power. Cale sensed the presence of danger, but he did not fear it. He had faced enemies before, both visible and invisible, and now, with Elara by his side, he felt more prepared than ever. The bond between them had been forged in fear and tested by the curse, and it was unbreakable. Elara felt it too, the quiet, steady strength that came from standing with him, from facing the darkness and surviving. He was no longer the frightened maid who had shivered in the snow. She was a survivor, a fighter, and a partner in the challenges that lay ahead. As the first light of morning broke across the horizon, painting the snow in gold and silver, Cale turned to her, his eyes softening with a rare vulnerability. "We have faced much together," he said, "and yet I know there will be more. But whatever comes, we will face it as one. Do you understand?" Elara nodded, a smile spreading across her face. "I understand," she said. Together, the shadows in the forest remained, watching, waiting. The curse had not entirely vanished, but its hold had been broken, weakened by courage, trust, and the bond between the Alpha and the Maid. The threat still existed, but so did their strength, their unity, and their resolve. And so, in the quiet of the winter morning, the Alpha and the Maid stood together, their hands clasped, hearts bound by trust, fear, and something deeper, a bond forged in darkness and strengthened by courage. The snow sparkled around them like diamonds, the forest whispered with life, and the world seemed full of possibility once more. The winter feast had begun as a celebration of power and tradition, but it had ended as the beginning of something greater, a journey of trust, redemption, and transformation. Cale and Elara had faced the curse, faced their fears, and emerged stronger, united and ready to face whatever the world would throw at them next.
And, even as the shadows lingered at the edges of the forest, the two of them knew one truth above all. Together, they could face anything.
The frost would come again. The darkness would return. But so would the courage that had been born in the heart of the Alpha and the Maid. And with it, a bond that could not be broken, a love that could not be denied, and a future that awaited them beyond the snow, beyond the shadows, and beyond the winter feast itself. The story of the Alpha and his Maid had reached a turning point, but the legend had only just begun.